Hello everyone, welcome to the second video in the Indian Knowledge Systems series. In this presentation, we'll be looking at how the development of Indian knowledge system happened over the centuries, and we are going to trace its journey from the early oral traditions to the later highly organized centers of learning, which actually shaped the knowledge systems in India for centuries. Now, in the earliest phase of these knowledge systems, knowledge in India was transmitted through oral tradition, and it was considered a sacred and collective thing and not an individual property. It was meant to be shared. It was a collective thing, and it was preserved through disciplined memorization and careful transmission by the gurus, scholars, and spiritual leaders. Okay, since it was orally transmitted, and it actually needed such disciplined memorization. Accuracy, responsibility, continuity, all these were the central uh, elements to this process of learning. And also the learning spaces in India, in ancient India, they were deeply connected to spiritual life. For example, the temples, monasteries, and ashrams, they functioned as centers for education in these periods. Okay, so even though they were spiritual places, they were also a space for dialogue, a reflection, even a debate as a daily practice. So education was not separate from life, it was rather integrated seamlessly into the social, moral, and spiritual experience. So, gradually, what happened was these knowledge systems they moved away from this oral transmission phase to the written documentation phase. And this was a transformation which allowed the knowledge to be preserved in a stable and systematic forms. And earlier it was transmitted orally, while now large bodies of text emerged, which created an organized and intellectual tradition that could be studied, interpreted, and expanded across generations. So now it could be studied and first-hand interpretations could be made. So it was a crucial shift from memory-based learning to institutional knowledge systems. Now, the earliest foundations was made by the Vedas, which brought a lot of ideas about cosmology, ritual, philosophy, everything. These were the foundational text, the Vedas, and then the Aranyakas, which deepen the spiritual reflection through symbiotic and meditative interpretation, and then the Brahmanas, in which systemized the ritual practices and their meanings. And then we have the Upanishads, which introduced profound philosophical inquiry into the reality of consciousness. And together, all these texts formed a comprehensive, very comprehensive framework of knowledge, which was transmitted across these generations. Here, we'll have Takshashila, which is the world's first university, which is regarded as the first or the earliest organized center of higher learning, and often regarded as the world's first university. The students from different regions, they came here to study diverse subjects, which makes it an early model of institutional education. It represents thus the transition from informal learning spaces to the structured academic institution. So earlier we looked at how learning spaces were mostly temples, monasteries, and everything, and it was much an informal way of learning. But now, along with the emergence of Takshashila, this a structured system has been introduced as academic institutions. We look at the teaching methodology or how the education happened in Takshashila. So this educational model at Takshashila was highly interactive. It was based on discussion, debates, and reasoning rather than passive learning. And the students, they received practical learning or training along with the theoretical instruction also. And also they had personal mentorship, which played a central role in the intellectual development of the students. Now, the knowledge was not meant to be memorized alone, it was meant to be understood and then applied into their daily lives. So there was a personalized mentorship and guidance, which also helped in the learning process. Another educational center was Nalanda, the Nalanda University, which flourished between the 5th and the 12th centuries, which represents a peak of Indian higher education. At its height, it hosted around thousands of scholars and students, and it became especially renowned for the Buddhist philosophy which it propagated, while also supporting the diverse fields of study. So, Nalanda symbolizes the maturity of India's academic traditions. Now, let's look at the um, campus of Nalanda. It was not only an intellectual center, but it was also an architectural and institutional achievement for India. Its campus included lecture halls, monasteries, meditation centers, and prayer halls. And it had a complex library which housed vast collections of manuscripts. And the physical structure of the campus itself reflected the importance that was placed upon scholarship and learning at Nalanda University. Now, it functioned as a truly international center of learning because the scholars, they traveled from vast places like China, Korea, Tibet, and Southeast Asia to get and study here. And many important figures like Chinese monk Zhuangzang, who documented Nalanda's academic life in detail. So many eminent figures wrote about Nalanda. And through such exchanges, Indian knowledge systems they spread across Asia and eventually influenced global intellectual history. Now we look at the curriculum at Nalanda, which was very broad and rigorous. Philosophy and logic trained the students in reasoning and debate, while the medicine, which they learned, it developed through Ayurveda and anatomical studies. And mathematics advanced through the algebra, geometry, and complex calculations. And they also learned astronomy, which focused on observation and calendrical systems. Um, then you have linguistics, which involve the Sanskrit grammar, phonetics, and comparative language study. And all these broad sections of curriculum, above everything, there was a critical inquiry which formed the foundation of learning in Nalanda. Now, as the legacy of ancient Indian education, these institutions like Takshashila and Nalanda, they ensured the preservation of knowledge through a systematic documentation. And this enabled a large-scale intellectual exchange across the cultures and regions, nations. Their educational models, they established a high academic standards and innovative teaching practices. And as a result, India emerged as a recognized global center of learning in the ancient world. So they made a huge contribution in the transmission of learning across the world. Now, what is the impact of these institutionalized learning which happened in the ancient India? Uh, Today, these ancient centers, they still inspire the renewed engagement with Indian knowledge systems. Their legacy that demonstrates that true education is not confined to time or geography. It transcends everything. It's a continuous intellectual journey which connects the past wisdom with future responsibilities. They also and they continues shaping modern educational principles over all these centuries and across the world. So these are the major contributions of Indian learning systems which happened centuries back. That's the end of today's video.